My granddaughter began to cry, her shoulders trembling as she tried to hold back her voice. She poured beer on me at the company party and told me to go home, she said. At a company social event, my granddaughter was doused in beer by her boss and thrown out. When she came home soaked in beer, I was stunned. I questioned her about what had happened and learned for the first time that she had been the victim of workplace bullying. Furious, I immediately called Mr. Johnson, the president of her company. Coincidentally, I was in the middle of negotiating a major deal with her company at the time, but because of this incident, I called off all negotiations and declared that I would never sign the contract. Shocked, Mr. Johnson promised that he would resolve the issue and ensure the person responsible apologized, so I agreed to give him a bit of time. Mr. Johnson soon arrived, bringing along Heather, the department head who had bullied my granddaughter. While he apologized to me, Heather stubbornly refused to apologize herself. To help Heather understand even a fraction of the suffering Alice had endured, I used a plan I had set up in advance to shake her to her core. Heather took the bait completely. She panicked, turned pale, and finally began to apologize profusely, but her words no longer reached me. My name is George Newman, and I turned 71 this year. I spent decades growing the company I started into a major corporation. I have since handed over the role of president to a subordinate and now serve as chairman. My company, known as the Newman Group, consists of dozens of affiliated businesses and holds considerable influence. My name, as someone who built a corporate empire from the ground up, is widely recognized not only in the industry but also by the general public. The main reason I have not retired and continue to serve as chairman is because I genuinely love to work, and as long as I am healthy, I have no desire to step away from it. The president and other board members also prefer that I remain chairman, saying that my name recognition serves as valuable promotion, so I plan to continue in this role for the foreseeable future. More than anything, I am determined to witness my only granddaughter become a strong and independent woman while I'm still alive. My granddaughter's name is Alice. She is 18 now, but her parents, my only son, and his wife passed away in an accident when she was just 3. While I've been remarkably successful in business, building a solid foundation, and continuing to lead it today, my personal life has been marked by significant hardship. I began working right after graduating high school, constantly improving the way I did things and achieving results that led people to say I was a guaranteed future executive. Back then in Japan, promotions were strictly based on seniority, so even though I outperformed others by a wide margin, I never received rewards that matched my efforts. The unspoken rule was that if you earned a good position in the future, you'd be paid well and could take it easy, so it was natural to accept unfair treatment while you were young. Among my peers, I was earning relatively well, but the growth of my salary paled in comparison to my performance. I never liked the idea of making up for it decades later through promotions. Around that time, a friend from my hometown approached me to help him start a new business. The company I was working for then was mid-sized, and for someone like me deemed to have a bright future, taking on such a risky venture was practically unheard of. But I had a strong feeling that if I didn't take this bold step, I would end up leading a safe but painfully ordinary life. Unlike today's world, where you can start a business online with minimal capital, back then you needed to secure an office and have a substantial amount of startup funding. My friend came from a wealthy family and had the backing of both his family and a bank loan, which made it possible to clear that initial hurdle. At the time, I was dating the woman who would later become my wife, but we weren't married yet, and I was still relatively free to take risks. So I made the bold choice to leave my job and partner with my friend to start a new business. When I suddenly announced my resignation, the company was shocked and tried hard to get me to stay, but once they realized I was serious, they quietly let me go. I joined my friend's company and worked desperately from the ground up, gradually improving its performance and getting the new business on track. I earned the title of vice president, worked tirelessly, and quickly began earning more than I had at my previous job. I married the woman I had been seeing, and we were blessed with a child. That child was my only son. Having a child made me even more driven, and I continued growing the company. But before long, disagreements over management policy arose between my friend and me, and we eventually parted ways. By then, the company had grown to several hundred employees, and I had built a wide network of trusted colleagues both inside and outside the firm. Together with the talented people who followed me out of the company, I started my own business and became a company president in my 30s. This was the starting point of what would become the Newman Group. Having gone through the experience of building a company from scratch with my friend, I already knew what to do to grow a business when I became a president myself. I didn't need anyone to teach me. Throughout my 30s and 40s, I worked almost non-stop, devoting everything to expanding the company. When capable people joined me, I launched new businesses in their areas of expertise and entrusted them with leadership roles, allowing the group to expand rapidly. Out of the dozens of companies I founded, only one failed. The rest all thrived under my direction. This period coincided with Japan's economic bubble, when the more you work, the more you earned a level of prosperity that's hard to imagine today. It was the peak of my life. But when the bubble burst, the economy across Japan worsened, and my group, which had expanded into numerous industries, also faced difficult times. However, unlike many other business owners of the time, I had little interest in making money by flipping land and assets, so I had avoided deep involvement in the bubble. As a result, while there were losses, the group remained stable. The fact that I made it through the collapse with minimal damage is still talked about as something of a miracle. Around that time, my only son had grown up, graduated from university, and started working, producing solid results. Even in the post-bubble era of economic decline, my son didn't let adversity faze him. He joined a company completely unrelated to mine and still managed to succeed. Having gained confidence in his abilities, he married a woman he had met in college, and they had a daughter. His wife was intelligent and composed, able to act naturally even in front of someone like me, the head of a major corporate group. Even as his father, I couldn't help but admire the fact that he had found such an extraordinary partner. It was important to me that my son had achieved results at work without relying on my help. But what truly made me proud was that he had developed into the kind of man who could win the heart of such a remarkable woman. With things going as they were, I began to think that if he ever wished to, I could eventually pass on my position to him. Their daughter, Alice, was my first grandchild, and I adored her so much that I felt I could never tire of seeing her face. In business, I had weathered the fallout from the bursting of the economic bubble, and in my personal life, I was at the pinnacle of happiness, feeling completely satisfied with the life I had lived. But then, the greatest hardship of my life struck me. My son and his wife were killed in a multi-vehicle accident on the expressway. When I first received the news, I was so shaken that I couldn't even comprehend the words the caller was saying. Looking back, it wasn't that my mind couldn't process the words, it was that my heart refused to accept them. At the time, my son and his wife had entrusted Alice to me since they were traveling a long distance to visit a friend. I could never bring myself to think of it as a blessing in disguise that Alice had not been involved in the accident. For a while, I was so devastated that I could hardly function, even at work. In an instant, all possibilities vanished, my son taking over the Newman Group, his brilliant wife becoming a wise and loving mother, the birth of a second grandchild. Had Alice also been lost in that accident, I believe I would have given up on work altogether and spent the rest of my life in a remote mountain village, quietly honoring my son's memory. But standing before me was young Alice, too little to grasp the meaning of her parents' death. The legal matters around the accident could be handled by others, but raising Alice was something I could never entrust to anyone else. Thankfully, my wife was still in good health at the time, so together we decided to raise Alice ourselves in place of her parents. What was most heartbreaking was when Alice cried and asked us, "When will they come back?" longing for her parents who would never return. When I told her, "They've gone to a faraway place and can't come back," she replied, "Then I want to go there too," sobbing uncontrollably. My wife and I could only grieve in silence. But no matter how deep the sorrow, time slowly begins to heal. As Alice grew older, She gradually came to understand what had happened to her parents, and by the time she entered elementary school, the days of crying for them had nearly ceased. As for me, I threw myself even further into work, and I made sure that if anything were to happen to me, I had arrangements in place not only to pass on my assets to Alice, but also to ensure she would be cared for in a trustworthy, secure environment. But around that time, my wife's health began to decline, and though she could still take care of herself, she could no longer look after Alice full time. Given my demanding schedule, there was no way I could return home at a regular hour each day, and I was hesitant to leave Alice in a childcare facility where I couldn't keep an eye on her. At a loss, I asked Alice what she wanted to do, and without hesitation, she said, "I want to stay with you, Grandpa." At first, I started to say it's not that simple, but quickly realized that her suggestion might actually be the perfect solution. If I were an ordinary office worker, there's no way I could work while keeping a small child close by. But fortunately, I had the authority to bend the rules if necessary. I spoke carefully with my staff and arranged to create a space in my office for Alice's care, under the vague condition that it would be temporary until she had emotionally stabilized. I paid for the renovation costs personally, never using company funds, and even increased the compensation for the secretaries who would likely spend time with Alice, using my own assets. I expected some to accuse me of abusing my position, but everyone in the company already knew what had happened to my son and his wife. Also, since I had never misused my power before, the people around me quietly accepted my decision. I had two dedicated secretaries, both of whom loved children, and without even taking the extra allowance I had prepared, they willingly made time to care for Alice. Alice, too, seemed to enjoy talking with the secretaries, adults younger than her parents, but still grown up enough, and quickly became close to them. Every day after school, Alice would come to the chairman's office and immediately start working on her homework. Both my late son and his wife had been excellent students, and perhaps thanks to their genes, Alice was naturally gifted in logical thinking. Though I had included toys and games in the space I had prepared for her, Alice preferred speaking with adults to playing with those. Before long, people who spent time with her began saying things like, "Alice truly takes after you. Mr. Newman, she's brilliant." At first, I dismissed it, saying, "Don't flatter me just because she's my granddaughter." But it turned out they weren't just being polite. She once asked me something about our work, and the question was so insightful, it was hard to believe it came from a child. For example, well, it's not surprising if a child knows that fluctuations in the dollar-yen exchange rate affect exports. But Alice seemed to understand the causes of those fluctuations. She suddenly asked why we weren't planning to export more next month, since a weaker yen was expected and we could profit. I didn't know how to respond. Alice said that? I told her that we can't just adjust the import/export quantities on a whim like a game, but did you perhaps teach her that the yen would weaken due to changes in U.S. policy? Why on earth would I have such a blunt conversation with my granddaughter? We mostly talk about simple, everyday things. Well, there are tons of economic explainer videos online now that even children can understand. But if Alice really picked this up on her own just after entering elementary school, her powers of observation and comprehension must be extraordinary. She's always surrounded by financial reports and trade data when she comes here. Maybe she's piecing together things she sees and hears in her own way. That particular conversation ended there, but after hearing similar comments from multiple people, I eventually asked Alice directly, "Alice, are you more interested in what the adults do here than in games or comics?" Not really. But people say you ask them a lot of questions about work. I just ask when something seems curious to me. I'm not really interested in work or anything." I see. Alice said she wasn't interested in business, but I was certain that wasn't true. It wasn't that she was lying, of course. When people truly have no interest in something, they don't even register it, let alone think deeply about it. But Alice had begun to grasp the essence of business-related topics she overheard, without anyone prompting her. I suppose you could say she had a natural aptitude for business. Even so, I didn't take that as a cue to push her into some kind of elite education track. I wanted Alice to take her time and naturally discover what she truly wanted to do. and I had no intention of forcefully steering her interests toward business. Instead, I simply asked those around her to answer her questions seriously and honestly, just as they would to any adult, no sugarcoating, just because she was a child. And after several months passed, I could no longer deny that Alice's talent for business was real. She had a mind that might not instantly comprehend information, but stored it somewhere deep, and, when something later connected, she would suddenly grasp the big picture all at once. She was what you'd call a natural-born thinker. Whenever Alice watched the news and muttered something like, "Oh, so that's what it means," it was a sign she had understood a core aspect of how the world works. In the end, Alice kept coming to the chairman's office regularly until midway through high school. By then, she was capable of discussing current company matters as an equal with my secretaries. Of course, the secretaries never revealed anything confidential, but Alice's fresh, unorthodox insights often helped stimulate their thinking and proved useful in their work. When Alice's visits became less frequent as she grew older, the ones who missed her the most were those very secretaries and a few board members who had found her observations helpful. From my own perspective, her intellectual ability, especially her adaptability in business, was remarkable. It made me question whether she even needed to attend university. Alice herself was thinking the same thing. Having spent years in close contact with real business, she struggled to find meaning in studying for entrance exams, which felt more like a pattern matching game than actual learning. "Grandpa, I'm not interested in studying just for tests. Is it okay if I start working right after high school?" Of course. There was no way I could have answered any differently. So Alice graduated and joined a mid-sized trading company. The company primarily hired university graduates, but it didn't exclude high school graduates either. They had a policy of hiring anyone who could demonstrate ability in their entrance exam, even junior high school grads, and Alice passed that bar. Just to be clear, I didn't use any of my personal connections to get Alice that job. In fact, I went out of my way to ensure that the company didn't find out she was my granddaughter, so they wouldn't treat her differently in hopes of building ties with me. That means Alice's acceptance was entirely her own achievement, earned through merit alone. It's easy to imagine how much of an impression Alice must have made during her interview, having spent her childhood talking business with corporate secretaries. She likely didn't even realize it was special, but I'm sure she responded with a level of insight and eloquence far beyond the interviewer's expectations and passed with flying colors. On Alice's first day of work, I delayed my own departure that morning, just that once, to see her off. She left the house smiling, dressed in a brand new suit, full of energy. I was certain my son and his wife, watching from heaven, were smiling too, proud to see their daughter enter the working world. For the first time since that tragic accident, I felt a bit of the weight I'd carried lift from my shoulders. If Alice could just make it through the next few years on her own, without any interference from me, and gain the confidence to live and work independently, I'd have nothing left to worry about. Having fulfilled most of my responsibility in raising Alice, I returned to my role as chairman in an office that had reclaimed its original space after her nursery area was removed. Before long, I noticed that Alice had started to look more tired than usual, but I interpreted that as a sign she was facing challenges for the first time in a world where she had no protector, trying to overcome them on her own. As her grandfather, I naturally wanted to do everything I could to help her. But I also knew that, with my influence, stepping in too easily could do more harm than good, so I refrained from prying into her daily struggles. Later, I would come to regret not taking her gloomy expressions more seriously and not asking sooner what was troubling her. The turning point came nearly 6 months after Alice had started her job. At her company, it was tradition to hold a social gathering once the summer heat had settled down. By that time, the new recruits from spring would have completed their training, learned the ropes, and established connections within the company. The goal of the gathering was to strengthen workplace communication through informal interaction. I thought it was a good thing that Alice had joined a company that valued personal connections like that. But on the day of the gathering, I noticed her looking even more downcast than usual. It was just a passing impression I had that morning, looking at her sleepy face and assuming she was just tired. Alice, you've got your company party today, right? Back when I was young, it wasn't unusual for underage high school grads to drink at these things. But times are different now. It might be tough dealing with drunk people while sober, but it's still a great chance to talk to folks. Enjoy yourself. Yeah, I'll try. I was a little concerned about how unusually quiet Alice seemed, but I had a business meeting scheduled that day and had to leave right away, so I didn't give it much more thought as I headed out. The meeting went smoothly, and I finished all my work earlier than expected, so I returned home while it was still fairly bright outside and relaxed. Assuming Alice would have eaten at the company gathering, I made myself a simple meal and planned to head to bed after seeing her come home. I had expected her to be home around 8 or 9 p.m., but she returned much earlier, just after 7. I felt something was off the moment I realized I didn't hear Alice's usual cheerful, "I'm home," from the front door. Even after some time passed, there were no footsteps moving from the entrance, and finding that strange, I left my room and headed toward the front. There I saw Alice standing frozen in the entryway, still wearing her shoes. Her shoulders were slumped, and her head hung low, her bangs covering her face so I couldn't see her expression. "You're home." That was earlier than I expected. "What's wrong? Come on in." It was only when I spoke that Alice seemed to snap out of her trance and looked up. She must have been deep in thought. She hadn't even noticed me approaching. Did something happen? As I stepped a bit closer, I noticed a distinct odor hanging in the air. That familiar smell from drinking parties. The sharp scent of alcohol. Alice had left the house wearing a white blouse, but now I could see it was discolored around the shoulders and chest, stained a faint brown. Her hair had lost its volume and clung flatly to her head. It wasn't the kind of disheveled look you get just from sweating on a commute, and there hadn't been a drop of rain all day. It had been perfectly clear skies. This smell, is that beer? Don't tell me someone at your company forced you to drink? Worried, I rushed over and asked, thinking perhaps she'd been pressured into drinking. At that moment, tears began to stream from Alice's expressionless eyes. She buried her face in my shoulder and began to cry, her body trembling as she stifled her sobs. I understood immediately that something serious had happened, but I resisted the urge to pull her away and demand an explanation. Alice had made it home safely right now. Calming her was more important. I told myself that over and over. After a moment, I gently said, "Let's get you inside," and helped her take off her shoes. I urged her to take a bath, and she walked unsteadily to the bathroom. She took a full 30 minutes to clean herself and change before coming back. She looked much more like her usual post-bath self, but her expression was still heavy and her eyes were bloodshot. She had cried again in the bath, no doubt. I handed her a glass of water and sat across from her on the sofa. After she took a sip and caught her breath, I finally asked, "What happened?" Alice opened her mouth several times but fell silent again, unsure how to begin. But when I waited quietly, she eventually began to speak in a halting voice about what had happened. "Someone at work poured beer on me and told me to go home." I nearly slammed my hand on the table and demanded, "Who did this to you?" However, having already considered a few possibilities based on Alice's appearance when she returned home, I had mentally prepared myself to stay calm, and that allowed me to avoid raising my voice. If I lost my composure now, I would ruin the fragile calm she was just beginning to regain. So, maintaining a steady tone, I asked, "They poured beer on you at the company gathering? It wasn't some kind of party game or prank, was it? I can't imagine anyone at a company event behaving that recklessly." "No, it wasn't that. It was a gathering mainly for the university grads, and I was told I was just in the way since I'm a high school graduate and underage." "So they poured beer on you because of that?" "It's not like they did it out of nowhere. I said I still wanted to join, even if I wasn't drinking, and then she said, 'If you don't get it when I say it, I'll make sure you do,' and just dumped beer on my head." I could feel my heart pounding as I imagined the scene. But still, I kept my tone even. "And no one around tried to stop her? No one said anything?" No, I was standing near the kitchen, kind of behind a partition. I don't think anyone else saw. Then she said, if you're fine showing yourself to everyone in that mess, go ahead. But there was no way I could let anyone see me like that. So I just left. Then I asked the two questions I most needed answers to. Who exactly are you talking about? And do you have any idea why she did that to you? It was Heather, the department head. She's always yelling at me. She was in a particularly bad mood today. I'm not exactly sure why, but she always complains that I'm too cheerful, that I smile too much around the guys like I'm flirting or something. I think she's just always disliked the way I carry myself. But still, pouring beer over someone's head? This is important, so I'll ask again just to be sure. You didn't make any major mistake at work. Didn't repeat an error you'd already been warned about. Didn't inconvenience Heather in any way, and yet, at the gathering, she suddenly told you to leave because you're underage and poured beer on you? Yes. And from the way you're speaking, this Heather is a woman, right? Female department head? Yes. I see. I understand. It must have been hard to talk about all that. You must be exhausted. Go ahead and rest. If you haven't eaten, would you like me to order something? I'm really not hungry right now. I just want to sleep. All right. If you get hungry in the night, help yourself to whatever's around. Alice gave a faint smile and returned to her room. Once I heard the door close, I turned on my heel and headed straight into my study. My emotions were already in chaos, but rather than let them explode, I sat down, grabbed a notepad and pen, and began listing what I needed to do, what I could do. But even as I tried to write just a few words, my handwriting grew increasingly erratic. I tore up each note in frustration and started over again and again. After wasting nearly 10 pages, I finally admitted to myself there was no way to calm this fury. I threw the notepad and pen onto the floor. I had never taken my anger out on objects before, but this time I couldn't control it. Piecing together everything Alice had told me, it was clear what had happened. She had been suffering from ongoing workplace harassment, and not just from anyone from her direct supervisor, a department head. This Heather, as Alice had said, would often make sarcastic remarks like, "Stop trying to charm the men," but I knew Alice would never behave inappropriately. She had been around adults since childhood and could read the room and respond with maturity. On top of that, Alice had a natural sense for business. Not only was she pleasant to work with, but she likely began to shine in her job early on. Given that, it's easy to imagine her being well-liked by her senior colleagues and warmly regarded by employees who had daughters of a similar age. It's likely that Heather, whoever she was, resented Alice for that. Not just irritation, but real jealousy. If Alice had repeatedly failed at work or caused trouble for Heather, then some tension might be understandable. But Alice had clearly said she hadn't done anything to deserve this. Knowing how sharp Alice was, it was very unlikely she'd commit such glaring errors that would draw a superior's wrath. As I connected the dots, everything that had felt off lately suddenly made sense. Alice's weary expression in recent days. No doubt it was largely because of Heather. Alice had been holding up under the stress of daily harassment, and then Heather used the company gathering as an excuse to publicly humiliate her. At a gathering like that, where people naturally relax and socialize, Alice's gift for conversation likely would have helped her make even more positive impressions. Heather must have seen that potential and wanted to snuff it out completely. By the time I reached that conclusion, my urge to lash out and protest was burning uncontrollably. I had thought that, by seeing Alice land a job on her own, I had nearly fulfilled my duty to raise her into a capable adult in place of my late son and daughter-in-law. But while I had been patting myself on the back, Alice had been quietly suffering, keeping it all to herself, trying to endure and fix it on her own until she finally reached her limit. This wasn't just workplace harassment, it was psychological abuse, plain and simple. The image of my son and his wife, taken from this world before they could see Alice grow up, flashed across my mind, full of grief. I had reached my breaking point. Unable to contain myself, I pulled out my phone. From the newly added contacts, I selected one and tapped to make a call. As my finger hovered over the screen, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, my face twisted in an expression of rage I had never seen before. The call connected immediately. "Hello, this is Mike Johnson speaking. Am I speaking with Mr. Newman?" "Yes, this is George Newman." "Mr. Newman, thank you so much for taking the time to call today. I truly skip the formalities. I know calling you directly like this is highly inappropriate, but I had to reach out right away. There's something urgent I need to tell you. Of course, this sounds quite serious. Has something happened? Don't ask if something happened." "Pardon? What kind of company are you running over there? Do you allow your managers to mentally torment employees just because they don't like them?" "I understand you're upset, Mr. Newman, but if I may, I don't even know what this mental torment refers to. Without understanding the specific issue, I'm afraid I can't offer a response." Despite being shouted at, Mr. Johnson remained composed and tried to respond sincerely. That helped me regain a bit of my composure. "You're right. I got ahead of myself. Let me explain things in order. I'll need a few minutes." "Yes, of course. I'm listening." And with that, I began to recount everything that had happened. The truth was, the man I was speaking to, Mr. Johnson, was the president of the very company where Alice worked. In fact, he was the one I had met earlier that morning for a business negotiation. We had met to finalize a deal worth $80 million that Mr. Johnson had proposed to my company last month. While $80 million wasn't a massive deal for us, it was positioned to trigger other related projects, so I had agreed to meet him personally and evaluate his character. From Mr. Johnson's perspective, this was a pivotal deal that could determine his company's future. I had found nothing wrong with the contract itself, and I was ready to move forward, having seen that Mr. Johnson was sincere and dependable. The formal signing was scheduled for another day, but as far as I was concerned, the deal was practically settled. Let me be clear, this business deal had absolutely nothing to do with Alice's job. I hadn't gone easy on Mr. Johnson's company just because Alice worked there. My decision had been entirely impartial. Had Alice not returned home in such a state today, I never would have picked up the phone and dialed the number I had just received from Mr. Johnson earlier that day. Even though I had noticed early signs of change in Alice's behavior, I had failed to act quickly enough. I ended up standing by while the situation escalated into something far worse, and that regret weighed heavily on my heart. I revealed to Mr. Johnson that Alice was my granddaughter and told him she had been the target of bullying at his company, culminating in what could only be described as an act of violence. Mr. Johnson was stunned. He had clearly never imagined anything like this could be happening under his watch. I am ashamed to say I had absolutely no idea such an issue existed within our company. I don't expect any executive to have full visibility into everything that happens on the ground, but I do expect a president or director to at least have enough judgment to recognize and correct a department head with serious character flaws. I'm afraid, Mr. Johnson, that you've shown me you may not be up to the task. My deepest apologies. You personally didn't harm my granddaughter, so I'm not asking you to apologize for that. But I have no intention of rewarding a company that harbors someone who inflicted this kind of abuse with a massive contract. What? You mean, surely you don't mean to say? I told you during today's meeting that I was inclined to approve the deal. Forget that. I will not, under any circumstances, sign a contract with your company. Please, wait. You may think it's inappropriate to let personal matters influence a business decision, but my mind is made up. This isn't something I can justify publicly. However, if you ever find yourself needing to explain this situation to others, feel free to say it was simply me acting out of personal spite. I won't stop you. After making a move this forceful, I have no right to silence you. This can't be. I may face serious pushback from within my own company for this, but I'm willing to stake my position on it. This may seem like a blindside to you, but I won't back down. Please, just wait. I'm ending this call. I'll hold Heather accountable. I'll restructure our internal systems to prevent any further harassment and personally report back to you. Laugh if you want. Say I'm doing this just to salvage the contract. But I have my pride. I will take responsibility for not noticing the state of my own organization. At the very least, I will ensure your granddaughter never faces bullying again. Please just allow me the chance to show you that. Hum. I was just about to hang up, but if Mr. Johnson could truly eliminate harassment from his company under his own leadership, then Alice could continue working in the environment she had grown used to. I thought it over for a few seconds and told him clearly that I could cancel the deal at any time. Then I gave him a limited window to resolve the issue and ended the call. To my surprise, Mr. Johnson acted far faster than I ever expected. Next afternoon, I received a call from him. He wanted to come and apologize in person, bringing Heather, the woman who had poured beer on Alice, with him. It had only been a day since I had made my direct call to him, and now he was doing the exact same thing. I couldn't help but find something amusing about the symmetry. Perhaps Mr. Johnson was just as decisive as I was. I rescheduled my appointments and told him I would accept the visit. That afternoon, Mr. Johnson arrived at my office accompanied by a middle-aged woman. Her name was Heather, and she was Alice's department head. My first impression of Heather was that she had a slow, dull, emotional response. In my experience, people like her tend to resist taking responsibility. They'll use excuses like, "there's no evidence," or "others were involved too." Getting such people to admit fault is always difficult. But it seemed Heather had already been severely reprimanded by Mr. Johnson before coming here. Though she looked resentful, her expression was utterly worn down. "Mr. Newman, thank you for taking the time to meet us on such short notice. I have confirmed that Heather's actions were exactly as you described, and she admitted to them on the way here. That's a quick turnaround. I thought it would take several days at least. She had already been identified. All that remained was getting her to confess. At first, she denied it, but when I told her I was prepared to sacrifice an $80 million deal over this, she admitted to the bullying." I didn't exactly admit to bullying. I only said I might have been a bit too harsh in my guidance. Before Mr. Johnson could respond, I cut in. "Heather, was it? So you're saying what my granddaughter experienced from you falls within the bounds of guidance?" "No, I just meant it's a matter of perspective. I may have spoken strongly with the intent to motivate, but others might interpret that as harassment. And the beer incident? Excuse me? I can accept, in theory, that you might exclude an underage employee from an event involving alcohol. That's a judgment call. But in that case, you should have told her beforehand. Yet you didn't. How does someone with such poor communication skills become a department head? Ugh. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that there was a breakdown in communication. But pouring beer on someone's head to send them home? That's quite an innovative form of guidance. So tell me, will your company be paying for my granddaughter's shampoo and dry cleaning? If what you did qualifies as guidance from a superior, then it must be an officially sanctioned act. Oh, actually, I have a better idea. I stood up, walked over to a decorative bottle of fine brandy, and picked it up. Then I stepped toward Heather and said, "If I use this to guide you, I assume no one will object?" Heather flinched as I loomed over her. I said, "If you, who poured beer on my granddaughter, refuse this, then I'd love to hear your reasoning for educational purposes." Then I broke the seal and opened the cap. "It's a bit strong, so if it gets on your skin, it might sting unless washed off quickly, but it won't kill you. Please don't." As Heather recoiled in fear, I raised the bottle high and turned it over above her. She let out a scream and crouched down. But not a drop fell. "It's empty." I said this calmly, returning the bottle to the shelf and sitting back down. I had instructed my secretary to find an opaque liquor bottle and empty it beforehand, restoring the seal so it appeared untouched just in case the situation called for something dramatic. The bottle of brandy my secretary had prepared was dark enough that just pretending it was heavy gave Heather the impression it was full. "By the way, Mr. Johnson," I said, "you watched me swinging that bottle around without batting an eye. Did it never occur to you to stop me from dousing Heather?" "Not at all. That particular brand of brandy is one I drink myself. If it had been full, the glass would have looked even darker. So I realized right away that you must have prepared an empty bottle for dramatic effect, and I admit, I was quite curious to see how it would play out. Hearing Mr. Johnson say that with a mischievous grin, I couldn't help but burst out laughing too. I went through all that trouble to surprise both of you, only to find you saw right through it. Looks like I thought I had the upper hand, but it was you who were a step ahead, Mr. Johnson. While we shared a laugh, Heather remained on the floor, hands braced against it, too shaken to stand and breathing heavily. I wanted to say something like, "Did that help you understand even 10% of what my granddaughter felt walking through the streets soaked in beer?" But I could see she was more rattled than I'd expected. So I held back. Completely drained, Heather quietly offered an apology and left, escorted by Mr. Johnson. As they were leaving, Mr. Johnson asked, "Next time, would you allow me to bring a full bottle instead?" I appreciated both the speed with which he had brought Heather to face me and his boldness in openly suggesting we share a drink in the future. I responded with a grin. "If you bring the finest you've got, you're more than welcome." I'm sure that exchange gave Mr. Johnson confidence that the $80 million deal would go through after all. And indeed, the contract was finalized without issue. But even before that, Heather had already been removed from her position, deemed unfit for management, and reassigned to a regional branch as a regular employee. Considering how close the deal came to being canceled and what that would have meant for Mr. Johnson's company, none of the board members opposed the decision. Because of this situation, Mr. Johnson and other executives now knew about my relationship to Alice, but I asked him to ensure she would not be given any special treatment because of it. At the very least, I trusted that the employees Alice interacted with on a daily basis would continue treating her as an equal, without regard for my influence. I was honest with Alice about my intervention and how I had used my authority to have Heather removed. Even if I'd tried to keep it a secret, Alice and anyone else would have quickly realized what had happened, given that Heather was reassigned immediately after Alice confided in me about the harassment. It was only natural to be upfront rather than get caught hiding it. Alice seemed to have mixed feelings, but she understood. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved unless either she or Heather left the company. Without my intervention, it likely would have been Alice who was forced out. Still, I couldn't help wondering whether she was quietly angry with me for stepping in. But shortly after, when Alice received her first bonus, she gave me a fine teacup as a gift and said, "Please keep watching over me." That erased all doubt. Of course, I intend to continue watching over Alice as long as I possibly can. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do so, but when the time comes, a young, strong partner will appear in her life, someone who will take over the role I've played. I believe that choosing to assess the character of that partner may well be the final task of my life. At the very least, until that day arrives, I plan to remain active, fulfilling my duties without letting age dull my judgment or my resolve.